Hi guys, welcome to another video on Tactic Almost. Today we're going to be talking about the EMG KelTec RDB17, manufactured by Ares. So if you guys haven't already seen my unboxing video on this gun, I'll leave a link in the description. You can see my first reaction and first response to the unboxing of this gun. Its overall feeling and my first impressions are enumerated in that video. I recommend checking it out. It's a fun video. Let's go over the basic facts of this replica. It is advertised on eVeek for a retail price of $319. eVeek lists the FPS as between 390 and 420 with 0.2 gram BBs, which is roughly 1.4 to 1.6 joules. This replica includes one Ares AMAG 100 round shorty mag, as well as one Ares AMAG 130 round mag. Out of the box, it is wired for Dean's connectors for a 11.1 volt LiPo battery. It also features Ares EFCS fire control system. From my testing in terms of energy output, I got from 1.41 to about 1.53 joules and averaging about 1.48 joules. That is with the hop up potentially on a little bit, which I'll go into later. But in terms of out of the box being field legal in most places, it's really skirting the line there with the over 1.5 joule mark. My average rounds per second was 17.6, roughly 18 rounds per second, which is pretty decent. I'm fairly satisfied with the build quality of this replica. The finish is quite nice and hasn't worn. The polymer, which is covered in polymer basically, while it can get scratched, it is fairly durable, and the magazines are fairly sturdy as well. A little additional feature here is that the counterclockwise barrel threading has an additional little locking ring to help lock your flash hider or muzzle device in the rotation that you prefer. It's just a nice little touch. Usually I use an O-ring or 2 or 3 to sort of jam the flash hider into the position I want, but with this little locking ring, that is unnecessary. I can just adjust that to where I want it and then kind of crank down on it. This replica has several attachment points for attaching a sling. I have not actually used the sling with this yet, but it has 1, 2, 3, 4 attachment points for a sling. In terms of internal build quality, I had one problem initially with this. When I was trying to adjust the hop up, I could not for the life of me get a consistent hop up applied. So I ended up taking the gun apart and investigating what was wrong. Upon investigation, I discovered that an O-ring, which keeps the rotary hop up adjustment knob sort of friction fit in place, had broken. This O-ring had come from the factory broken basically, or had come from eVeek broken. So then I replaced the O-ring. Fortunately, I have a set of assorted O-ring sizes, and I managed to find one that fit that I could replace it with, and that got the hop-up back to a functioning, semi-functioning state. Adjusting the hop-up is actually really difficult on this replica. It involves removing the magazine and using this provided screwdriver to get in here, and you can see a little orange rotary hop-up adjustment wheel, and you have to kind of fiddle with it with this screwdriver to kind of slide it to one side or the other. It is extremely difficult, not something you really want to do in the field, not something you can really do with gloves on. I can't even get this screwdriver out with my gloves on. I have to take my gloves off every time I want to adjust. And the end result is not very confident adjustment of this wheel. You can barely tell when you've moved it. You can barely tell how much you've moved it. It's not fun. I understand that Ares and EMG and KelTec all wanted to make the most high fidelity replica possible, but having such a difficult access to the hop-up is just almost unacceptable in my mind. I basically have set this at a certain hop that is fairly satisfactory. It's not doing exactly what I want it to. It's not the flattest trajectory of BB, but it's so difficult to adjust this any further that I've just set it and left it where it is. It is fairly sighted in with this EOTech replica that I have on here, and I'm just going to leave it. Adjusting it in the field is just such a pain. Furthermore, if you adjust the wheel too much, it will actually reset to 0 hop up if you turn the adjustment wheel too far, which there's no indication that you may do that. So in your attempt to apply more and more hop up to this, you may ultimately apply no hop up, which is just really frustrating. So if you want a replica that has a decent hop up that you can kind of mess with and tinker with. Also, it's pretty difficult to get to the hop up and get to the barrel system when disassembling the gun. If you remove 4 pins, this gun basically separates into several sections, but getting those sections off of each other and getting them back together is a bit of a process, so it's not very fun. The included Aries AMAG magazines I have found are pretty decent, except I occasionally get into a state of jamming the follower in them. I don't know if it's because my Odin speed loader is a little too strong for them or something and I'm overloading them, but with both of these I have had at least one jam of the follower, leaving it in a state where I just have to disassemble it to clear the jam and get the thing back together. I'm not entirely sure if that's my fault or if that's the fault of the construction or design of these. However, it's something to consider. If you have an Odin speed loader, it may not be the best. These magazines may not be very satisfactory for you. So far, this replica has fit and fed every magazine I've tried, so I think there's room to branch out and try other magazines and see what works best for you. And it's great that it takes Stanag M4 style magazines. However, I wouldn't necessarily rely on the supplied Aries AMAGs. You'll just have to test those out for yourself. Another design feature that I'm not necessarily very happy with is the access to the battery compartment under the handguard here. It requires the removal of a pin here, and it is a very stiff pin to get out. You really need a tool of some sort, possibly a fake bullet, to push this pin out. And then just wiring the battery through the handguard is a little bit tricky. You can kind of jam up the wire a little bit and then your handguard won't go back on properly. So it's a little bit of a pain, not something you really want to do on the field. And the battery compartment is fairly small. The compartment space is maybe 6 inches long and about an inch square along that space. So what battery you can actually fit in there is going to be a little tricky. The fire selector is nicely placed. If anything, it's a little bit easy to flick it too far into auto if you just want semi. However, it's a fairly satisfying click. I don't have any complaints about that. The trigger is also a mechanical switch and is pretty satisfying. If you've seen my unboxing video, you've seen my first impressions of that. The magazine release is also really intuitive. I've had no trouble. I haven't even had to think about removing a magazine. It's just a really quick motion, grabbing the magazine and pressing this button at the same time. All in all, smart design choices by KelTec on all of these fronts. Also some fairly good design choices there in terms of EMG/Aries design choices for the replica of the KelTec. So I'll be honest, this is the first AEG I have fielded in a very long time. I have come from probably 5 to 7 years in HPA, and I'm fairly impressed with the functionality of this replica. The 11.1 volt LiPo battery with the Dean's connectors really makes the trigger response and the rate of fire satisfactory for me in terms of what I'm used to or what I have previously used in terms of electric guns. It has a proprietary gearbox, but from what I understand, most internal components from standard AEG gearboxes will work, just not necessarily the gearbox shell itself. The hop-up is also proprietary, and I kind of hope somebody manufactures an aftermarket hop-up unit for this that maybe has some features or is more cleverly designed in some way to allow easier adjustment or no possibility of over adjustment or something like that. For $319, I think there are probably better electric options out there. However, if your heart is set on a KelTec bullpup rifle, this is kind of the only option out there, and for $319 I'm fairly happy with it. In terms of modifications or accessories I've added to this, I have kept it stock in every way, and I have simply added a replica EOTech on here, and this is my 3D printed scope cam mount. I've added a little rail section here. I do occasionally need a side rail section for mounting my 360 camera or a GoPro, and the rail real estate on here, as you can see, is pretty limited. I know there are aftermarket handguards for the real KelTec, and that would be kind of interesting to explore. However, just be aware that if you do need a lot of rail real estate, you'll need to come up with your own way of adding those rails. I have also added a rail cover to the bottom here for the unused rail section. I have a tendency to place my gun on barricades, and I didn't want to damage the polymer rail section down here. I have a feeling it would be fairly easy to scratch and scuff and ultimately damage the dimensions of the rail down here, just because it is a polymer. That's not a denigration of the quality of this polymer. This is a nice polymer. It's just that any polymer out there is not going to hold up to being scratched on rocks and nails and whatever other crap that you're resting the gun on. I have also added a Knight's Armament flash hider in place of the original orange tip, which has the quick detach functionality for a suppressor. In terms of further accessories and tinkering and the often undiagnosed mental illness of airsoft that you may have if you are watching this video, there's unfortunately not very many accessories to add to this. There's currently no aftermarket. However, it is a very new replica on the market. I personally feel this would be a very difficult challenge to build into a DMR marksman rifle or sniper rifle or whatever, just because the hop-up is so finicky and difficult to access. That is not something you want with a designated marksman rifle. In terms of a cool CQB gun, that might be a viable route for this. However, it is still fairly heavy and fairly long. I just happened to have this out while I also had this G36C out, as one does, just, you know, airsoft guns lying around the house. And the length and dimensions are very interesting comparison. As you can see, they're almost the same length. I'll try to include some B-roll footage of that. However, you are getting the advantage of a bullpup on the KelTec. This G36C is actually lighter by maybe a pound or two, I'm not sure. It just feels much lighter. So in terms of recommending a overall cool CQB replica, I think the KelTec has some competition. Overall, would I recommend this, and to whom would I recommend this? I think if you're like me and you're just a gun nerd who needs a cool replica of a KelTec, this will definitely scratch that itch for you. In terms of a new player or somebody looking for something that's not an M4 but still values performance, I think I would suggest maybe looking elsewhere, possibly something with more aftermarket parts, possibly a Crytac or a VFC Avalon gearbox rifle. Something with a non-proprietary hop-up that is easier to access, honestly, is probably a better bet there. Yeah, for someone like me, I'm pretty happy with this replica. I was never looking for the maximal performing electric rifle. I was looking for a cool KelTec replica, and that's what I got, and I can't complain. If you're the kind of player that values performance less than just looking cool and feeling cool and being unique, this is a good option for that. I've had several people turn their heads and ask what the heck this gun is when I've taken it out, and that's not necessarily something that you're going to get with your more common aftermarket ready M4s and AKs. So that's something to consider. Overall, I've really enjoyed my time with this replica. It is really unique, yet is also not too unfamiliar to somebody who runs M4s. It is just sort of like a bullpup M4, if that makes sense. The manual of arms and the quick transition from shoulder to shoulder is not so different from your standard M4, and it's just a pretty fun replica. In terms of straight out of the box playability, this replica absolutely performs well enough to take it and run with it. That's what I've done with it. I took it out, and the first game of the day, the first burst of shots I fired in semi-auto at a target that was maybe 100 to 120 feet away. I got the hit on the guy. I was really surprised. So that just speaks to how this out of the box can totally work, can totally be played with. Definitely up to the job of playing pickup games. Whether or not it would hold up in a milsim environment or something like that, I can't speak to that yet. I have a feeling I would not necessarily use this or trust this for a larger milsim event, but in terms of your more average monthly game, yeah, this will work for you. So guys, thanks for watching this review of the EMG KelTec RDB17. I've enjoyed testing this gun, and I hope you've enjoyed watching or listening to this video. One thing to note with this channel is that I am not given any of the products that I review. These reviews are all purchased with my own money just to have the most honest and fair review that I can give possible. So if you appreciate this sort of honest, unbiased review of airsoft products, please let me know, or consider liking or subscribing or leaving a comment, and let me know your thoughts on the EMG/Aries KelTec RDB. Anyway guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.